gone through a rigorous admission process and thought he was an excellent candidate to obtain a congressional appointment to the Academy. In fact, despite the stiff competition, and there were dozens who had applied for this one appointment, he was confident he would get it. You might say perhaps a little overconfident. Yet when the appointment was announced, he was named the third alternate. The third alternate. It was clear he was not going to the Air Force Academy. The young man's disappointment was tremendous. His hope of becoming an officer and a pilot were gone. He didn't really even take the time to thank his parents and mentors for their help in the process. And he was just so focused on his personal disappointment. However, one day, about 3 weeks after that event, the young man got called out of class to go to this high school principal's office. And when he arrived there, he was ushered into a room where the principal was there, his high school football coach was there, and a man was there who he didn't recognize. Well, it turned out that that gentleman he didn't recognize was a football coach from the Air Force Academy. And the coach turned to the young man and simply said, "How would you like to play play football at Air Force?" He was given a second chance. And of course the young man was completely overjoyed. He'd gotten that second chance. He accepted that football appointment, and he eventually did realize his dream of becoming an officer and flying in the Air Force as a pilot for over 7 years. What he didn't know until years later, was that his mother and father and the high school football coach took the extraordinary step of actually contacting the Academy Athletic Department and petitioning them to take a look at this young man, despite the fact that he'd been denied an appointment to the Academy. And unbeknownst to him, his mom actually put together a scrapbook of the young man's accomplishments and sent it to the Academy Athletic Director. You see, I was that young man. And I still have that scrapbook today, 40 years later, that my mom made. So that resulted in 11 wonderful years in the Air Force, and you can bet I thanked my mom after that. But it was years later, and it shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been. You need to take the time to thank those who support you and mentor you as they do it. Don't wait to give thanks to others for what they do for you. Many will believe in you and help you. Thank them before it's too late. And don't take what they do for you for granted, especially your mom. Let's talk next about leadership. And this ties into courage and some of the remarks that Dr. Birch made earlier. We need leaders. We need leaders of courage. That doesn't mean you don't have fear, but we need leaders of courage. Leaders who will influence others to embrace the true faith and who will rally us to restore it. Leaders who can be courageous despite the fears they may have, courageous in influencing others morally, socially, politically, economically. But we must have hope, and our hope is in you as our future leaders. Well, what really is leadership? There are many descriptions. People talk about it. There's lots of terms thrown around about leadership. I pulled one out here from Norman Schwarzkopf, former 4-star general of the United States Army. And General Schwarzkopf said, "Leaders are ordinary people faced with certain circumstances. And the challenge of leadership is to get people to willingly do what they ordinarily would not do." Schwarzkopf also said, "Most important in leadership is character, selflessness, and in doing what's right, even when there's nobody there to judge you or see if you make the right decision." This reminded me of the cadet prayer in the chapel at West Point, which is the father of all service academies. And that prayer asks God to help us choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong. And never to be content with a half-truth when the whole truth can be won. It encourages us, it endows us with courage that is born of loyalty to all, that is noble and worthy, that scorns to compromise with vice and injustice, and overcomes fear when truth and right are in jeopardy. Courage, overcome fear, do the right thing. Leadership in its truest and finest form is not about division, but about unity. It's not about power, but it's about service. It originates not from vanity, but from charity. And it's not about me, but it's about us. Now I think that's a lot to wrap your minds around, so I want to give you a way to remember what's important as a leader. And it's a simple acronym I hope is easy to remember that I hope you will always remember. And the acronym is just ISC. Just 3 simple letters, ISC. It stands for this: I is for integrity, the standard by which your character is judged, and the measure of what people look for in tough times. It's about doing the right thing always, following God's law and striving for truth and justice. Stand with truth. Service, S is for service, service before self. True leaders serve those whom they lead. A good leader inspires others with confidence in him. A great leader inspires them with confidence in themselves. And C, courage. This is about personal courage, and it's also about instilling a culture of courage in others, regardless of the task or objective. We are to use the talents given us by our Creator in a way that delights Him, avoiding cowardice, which is really fear combined with a tendency toward idleness or sloth, and striving for courage personally and instilling courage in those we lead. One of the objectives of leadership is to produce more leaders, but it's not more followers. It's a simple but powerful umbrella under which all concepts, quotes, and ideas frankly on leadership, I think, can be brought to life. ISC. Integrity first, service before self, and courage in all that you do. Now, I'm going to tell another story. I'm going to talk about a leader of whom I'm confident you've not heard. I'm going to tell you a story about a man named Bill Crawford. Bill Crawford. It's a story written, actually, by Colonel James Mushkett, who was a classmate of mine at the Air Force Academy. And Jim's story is entitled, 10 Things a Janitor Can Teach You About Leadership. And I quote this following story, and paraphrase some of it. William, or Bill Crawford, certainly was an unimpressive figure. One you could easily overlook during a hectic day at the Air Force Academy. Mr. Crawford, as most of us referred to him back in the late 1970s, was our squadron janitor. While we cadets busied ourselves preparing for academic exams, athletic pursuits, Saturday morning parades, room inspections, and the like, Bill quietly moved about the squadron, mopping and buffing floors, emptying trash cans, cleaning toilets, or just tidying up the mess 100 college-age kids could leave in a dormitory. Bill was shy, almost painfully so. Our janitor always buried himself in his work, moving about with stooped shoulders, a quiet gait, an averted gaze. Well, Mr. Crawford, after all, he was just a janitor. That changed one fall Saturday afternoon in 1976. Jim was reading a book about World War II and a tough Allied ground campaign in Italy when he stumbled across an incredible story. And the story goes something like this. On September 13, 1943, a Private William Crawford from Colorado, assigned to the 36th Infantry Division, had been involved in some bloody fighting on Hill 424 near Altavia, Italy. The words on the page leapt out. In the face of intense and overwhelming hostile fire, with no regard for personal safety, on his own initiative, Private Crawford single-handedly attacked fortified enemy positions. And the story continued. And it ended with this: for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, the President of the United States, fill in the blank. Suddenly, Jim declared to his roommate, "You're not going to believe this, but I think our janitor is a Medal of Honor winner." Our janitor is a Medal of Honor winner. Well, we all knew that Mr. Crawford was a World War II Army vet, but that didn't keep my friend from looking at me as if I was some sort of an alien being. Nonetheless, we couldn't wait to ask Bill about the story on Monday morning. We met him. This is from my friend, his recollection of the story. We met Mr. Crawford bright and early on Monday and showed him the page in question from the book. Anticipation and, frankly, doubt on our faces. He stared at it for a few silent moments, then he quietly uttered something like, "Yep, that's me." Let me talk to you a little bit about the Medal of Honor. It's established in 1862. It's the highest military decoration that can be awarded military personnel. It's only awarded during time of combat, and it's for extreme heroism and gallantry under fire. Most people who win the Medal of Honor die in the act of winning the Medal of Honor. There are, so far, I guess, over the course of history and the country's wars since the Civil War, there have been, it's estimated, about 25 million Americans who have served in our armed forces. 25 million. Less than 3,500, or 1/100th of 1%, have earned the Medal of Honor. So, to continue the story, with our mouths agape, my roommate and I looked at one another, and then at the book, and back at our janitor. Almost at once, we both stuttered, "Well, why didn't you ever tell us about it?" He slowly replied after some thought, "That was one day in my life, and it happened a long time ago." Well, I guess we were all at a loss for words after that. We had to hurry off to class, and Bill, well, he had chores to do. But after that brief exchange, things were never again the same around the squadron. Cadets who had once passed by Bill with hardly a glance now greeted him with a smile and a respectful "Good morning, Mr. Cofer." Those who had before left a mess for the janitor to clean up started to take it upon themselves to put things in order. Most cadets routinely stopped to talk to Bill throughout the day, and we even began inviting him to our formal squadron functions. And he'd show up dressed in a conservative dark suit and quietly talk to those who approached him, the only sign of his heroics being a simple star-spangled lapel pin that he wore. Almost overnight, Bill went from being a simple fixture in our squadron to one of our teammates. Mr. Crawford changed too, but you had to look closely to notice the difference. After that fall day in 1976, he seemed to move with more purpose. His shoulders didn't seem to be as stooped. He met our greetings with a direct gaze and a stronger good morning in return. And he flashed his crooked smile more often. The squadron gleamed as always, but everyone now seemed to notice it. A wise person once said, "It's not life that's important, but those you meet along the way that make the difference." Well, Bill was one of those who made the difference for me. Well, the story of Bill Crawford, the janitor, really teaches us many valuable and unforgettable lessons, and here are a few. Be cautious of labels. Everyone deserves respect. You shouldn't, and I would add, you shouldn't have to be a Medal of Honor winner to be treated with respect. Courtesy makes a difference. Take time to know people. Anyone can be a hero and a leader. Rise to the occasion. Leaders should be humble. Life won't always hand you what you think you deserve. And no matter what task life does hand you, do it well. And the final thing I'd say, there's power in purpose. And I might add, to pray for the right purpose that cooperates with God's grace in you. So as you leave for the high school graduates, as you leave the academy, put into practice what we talked about today. Exhibit gratitude and become a leader. I thought recently about an occasion that happened at work. We invited actually a senior leader from Facebook to come in to talk to my group at Procter & Gamble. And it struck me that one of the things he said, and it was in business, it was in the context of business, but one of the things that struck me he said was, he told my group, he said, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" And I would encourage him, he said it in the context of business, and how do we can accelerate our business and do better, but it can be broader than that. Certainly there's going to be fear and doubt as you go out in the world, and you defend your faith, and you interact with those in the classroom, as Dr. Birch had said. But what would you do if you weren't afraid? Don't be afraid. Remember the truly inspiring example of Private William Crawford and the lessons he taught us. And try to model